The plan: drive up to Vermont on Columbus Day weekend and hike among the beautiful peak fall foliage. The reality. Hey everyone. So if you've spent any time watching my channel, I'm sure you figured out that I love backpacking trips. But I also like the anticipation and the planning. And I always go into a backpacking trip with a basic plan of how far I expect to go each day and where I'm thinking of camping each night. But I understand that they're tentative plans, and sometimes I adjust. Sometimes I might go farther than I thought. And I also try to have contingency plans in case I don't go as far as I thought or something goes wrong. And that's the story of this backpacking trip, where pretty much nothing went according to plan. And it started right from the beginning. So my plan was to hike north along the AT in Vermont, starting at Route 9 in the Bennington area and hiking up to Route 11 and 30, which is the Manchester Center area. And I would leave my car in the lot at the end, and I had a shuttle driver lined up to take me to the beginning to start my hike. And our plan was to meet at around 2:30. I'm about 15 minutes from the parking lot, and she sends me a text letting me know that she can't meet me and shuttle me. Luckily, I knew of another shuttle driver, and so I reached out to him, and he actually did come up and rescue me. He said, I just got to finish up a project at work, and then I have to drive all the way up to where you are, so it's going to be a while, but yes, I will come and shuttle you. My plan was to go 4 or 5 miles that first day on Friday. But because I got such a late start getting on trail, and it gets dark a lot earlier this time of year, I only made it 1.5 miles up the first steep climb to the first shelter, and the sun was already setting and it was getting dark really fast. So I left the shelter the next morning before dawn, and I started hiking in the dark. I knew I had more miles to do than I had originally planned, so I figured I'd get a head start on the day. I didn't get as far as I wanted to yesterday. I only made it up the first climb, and at the top of that climb there's a shelter, and by the time I got up there, it was already starting to get dark. I could have gone a little bit further and pitched a tent, but it was getting dark fast because of the storm coming in, and I figured I would just stay in the shelter and try to hike a little farther today. But that means if I want to get back on schedule with my original plan, I need to do about a little over 17 miles today. And it looks like it's gonna rain today. It rained on and off all during the night, so I was actually glad that I was in the shelter. But everything's wet this morning, so I have to be careful and not slip. So we'll see how far I get. I hiked that whole morning through the mist and the light rain. The view at every viewpoint was exactly the same. And the trail was wet and slippery, but little did I know it would get much worse. I also had somewhat of a climb up Glastonbury Mountain, and I noticed that I was sluggish and didn't quite feel like myself. I had a little bit of a runny nose, but that's normal when you're backpacking in the cold and the rain. And I felt kind of like body aches, but you could write that off to backpacking too. So I didn't think much of it, but I definitely didn't have the energy that I normally have. So I made it to the top of Glastonbury Mountain, and I stopped for a break at the shelter there to have something to eat. And just as I was getting ready to head back out, I had done 8 miles. I had another 9 to do to make it to the shelter that I wanted to make it to. At that point, the skies opened up and it started to pour. And it was pouring buckets. And it was coming down, cats and dogs and frogs and ducks and you name it. So I put on all my rain gear and I headed out. It's closed to the public. It's raining. There's no view from the top. And I don't do fire towers anyway because I'm afraid of heights. So I'll be moving on. The trail has now turned into a river, except where it was a lake. You know you're hiking through big, heavy rain cells when you have on your rain jacket, rain pants, a poncho, and an umbrella. All at the same time. And my feet were soaking wet. It was super slow going. And by the time I made it to that next shelter, it was already after 5:30. And sunset was about 6:15. So I knew I wasn't going to make it another 4.5, 5 miles to the shelter after that. And the way it was coming down in buckets like that wouldn't have been a good idea for me to be hiking in the dark. So I made the decision to stay at that shelter. So I'd done about 12.5 miles instead of the 17 that I had needed to do. The next morning, that left me with about 15 miles instead of the 10.5 that I was originally planning. Plus, I had Stratton Mountain to go up and over. Now, I was still not feeling great. The next thing I noticed was a sore throat and starting to get a cough. So at this point, I realized I'm getting sick. This is not just, I'm tired because I'm backpacking. I was actually coming down with something and getting sick. So I knew that with the trail being that slippery and that flooded, I wasn't going to make it 15 miles, including up and over Stratton. But there was a bad weather bypass. And so when I got to that point, and it was already after lunchtime, I decided to take the bad weather bypass and go around Stratton instead of up and over it. First mile was a woods road, and then after that it was back into the woods where the trail was muddy and wet and miserable. Wet boards or slippery? So by taking the bad weather bypass, I cut off about 4 miles from the mileage I would have done that day. I missed the top of Stratton, but it was cloudy and rainy and overcast anyway, so there wouldn't have been a view from up there. And I knew that at some point I'm going to come back and do a day hike to climb Stratton anyway. So I'll see it in better weather. And if I had tried to go up and over the top, I wouldn't have made it to Stratton Pond and the shelter before dark, which means I wouldn't have gotten to see Stratton Pond either. This is a very pretty morning. It's about time. The next morning, the sun came out. And despite the rain the night before and the slippery wet leaves on the trail, and my worsening cough and cold, I was able to finally get some views and appreciate the beautiful fall colors on my last day on trail. Oh boy. Bridge out. The bridge looks perfectly fine, but I don't want to risk it. Problem is, I don't see a better place to cross. I think that's my best crossing. So I made it across, but getting back up the other side here is going to be a little tricky. Hey look, a woods road. Maybe the trail will stay on this for a while. I have to make up a little time. The trail continued on the woods road for about a mile or so before reaching Prospect Rock, where I got my first good view of the weekend, overlooking Manchester Center below. Then it was back into the woods again and on to Spruce Peak, a blue-blazed scramble up to a viewpoint. You could hear the exhaustion and sickness in my voice when I got there. That's Spruce Peak. I have to climb that. Well, I don't have to, but to see the view I do. I'll leave my bag here. Despite feeling sluggish, I scrambled up to the top to get one more view, which I had been deprived of all weekend. This trip definitely did not go as planned, and I'd be stretching the truth to say that I had a lot of fun. But some trips are just like that. And there's the parking lot.